Netanyahu derrotado.
Netanyahu defeated. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu finds himself in the eye of the storm. Despite the tireless efforts of major Western media outlets to portray Bibi as the great winner of the geopolitical conflicts in the Middle East, Netanyahu has in fact failed against Iran, failed against Hamas, and is facing growing rejection from global public opinion. How will Netanyahu respond to this situation? Could he launch an attack against Iran in the coming days? Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. From Berlin, Germany, we begin broadcast number 273 of Demolishing Political Myths Talks. Thank you very much for joining us, and please remember to help us out with a thumbs up against censorship. From Madrid, Spain, on the other side of the European continent, we are joined by Juan Antonio Aguilar. Juan Antonio, my friend, how are things over there?
Muy buenas, muy bien. Un placer.
Very well. A pleasure, as always, to be on your show.
Juan Antonio,
Juan Antonio, many issues are tied to the Middle East. Many issues are tied to Netanyahu. Perhaps the first of all is this one. Donald Trump's recent post, just a few hours ago, an ultimatum against Hamas. Here's his post on the social network Truth. Hamas has been a ruthless and violent threat for many years in the Middle East. They have murdered and made lives unbearably miserable, culminating in the October 7th massacre in Israel. Babies, women, children, the elderly, and many young men and women killed, boys and girls preparing to celebrate their future lives together. In retaliation for the October 7th attack on civilization, more than 25,000 Hamas soldiers have already been killed. Most of the others are surrounded and trapped militarily, waiting for me to give the order from outside so that their lives are quickly extinguished. As for the rest, we know where they are and who they are, and they will be hunted down and killed. I ask that all innocent Palestinians immediately leave this area of potential future death for safer areas of Gaza. Everyone will be well cared for by those waiting to help. Fortunately for Hamas, however, they will have one last chance. The great, powerful and wealthy nations of the Middle East and surrounding regions, together with the United States, have agreed, with Israel's signature, to peace in the Middle East after 3,000 years. This agreement also spares the lives of all remaining Hamas fighters. The details of the document are known to everyone, and it's a great deal for all. One way or another, we will have peace in the Middle East. The violence and bloodshed will stop. Release all the hostages, including the bodies of the dead, now. An agreement with Hamas must be reached before 6 p.m. Washington time. All countries have signed. If this last chance agreement is not reached, hell, like no one has ever seen before, will be unleashed against Hamas. There will be peace in the Middle East one way or another. Thank you for your attention, President Donald J. Trump. Let's start there, Juan Antonio, with this ultimatum from Trump.
Well, I mean, ultimatum. Look, this man doesn't know how to do anything other than threaten with ultimatums, and that's how he goes from tweet to tweet with all his issues. It's a tweet that clearly shows how worthy he is of the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, just a cheap nightclub thug, a ruffian, a fool, a bully, a show-off. That's all he knows how to do. So, well, what's he gonna do? Let's see, 25,000 Hamas soldiers. But didn't he say there were 20,000? There won't be any left. What's the problem? What's the problem? Well, here you can clearly see the failure of Netanyahu's military operation. Because if Hamas were already down to those numbers, why would any remain? Maybe a few hundred scattered around. He'd already be defeated. Where would the problem be? That thing about 3,000 years, honestly, I don't know where that delusion comes from. Because it gives the impression that, well, this is the continuation of a war that began before the Romans arrived in Judea, or something like that. I don't know, maybe when the Persians were around the area. I don't know, it's just something that escapes me, because this man doesn't have the slightest clue about history. He's an ignoramus. I mean, he's a disaster as a politician. So he comes out with these outrageous statements, these stupidities that are very hard to interpret. That thing about the 3,000 years. The safe zones in Gaza. What are those supposed to be?
Las zonas seguras de Gaza, ¿cuáles son esas? Porque todos los días vemos cómo ordenan desplazar a la población.
Because every day we see how they order the population to be displaced. And when they pack up the camp, they bomb them. Just yesterday, 100 Palestinians were killed. We've seen Israeli drones burning the tents where they had relocated. What are the safe zones in Gaza? Come on, the indolent one in Washington, come on. What are the safe zones? If you're an idiot who doesn't understand anything, who only listens to the first fool who comes to whisper in your ear, you're not a president, you're a wreck. That's what you are. An ultimatum at 6 p.m. Washington time. Couldn't you have said Greenwich Mean Time, huh? So what? What are you going to achieve with that? And if it arrives at 6 p.m., then what? You're going to give the order?
Entonces vas a dar la orden. O sea, eres tú, no Netanyahu, el que está cometiendo un genocidio.
So it's you, isn't it? Netanyahu, the one committing genocide. It's you, Donald Trump, the one who should be sitting in the dock of the General Court of Justice. You're the one giving the orders. I don't know. I mean, I think anyone who reads that tweet and thinks for a moment, I'm saying this mainly for that whole sleazy world of the Western press, that whole dump of filth that the Western press represents. Because, I don't know, they could easily read it and interpret what this clown is saying. It's really not that hard. He's going to give the order to turn that place into a hell like never before. So, he's the genocidal one. He's the one who should be on trial at the International Court of Justice, along with the accomplices in Tel Aviv, of course. The ones who ultimately dropped the bomb. It's him. Him, the son-in-law, who's another criminal like him, the whole gang of murderers, that circle of killers he has in the White House, and above all, the constellation of wretches, who in the United States and outside the United States, in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, from the media, still give even the slightest bit of credibility or attention, or say this is a step toward peace, to what are nothing more than the threats of a thug who says he's going to unleash hell. No, man, you've already unleashed it. You've had hell going for over 2 years now. Well, 2 years exactly, actually. 2 years with hell unleashed. What do you mean you're going to unleash hell if it's already been unleashed? What are you going to do? Let's see, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep killing? Well, we're already used to it, thug. We're already used to it. What needs to be done here is to stop this bunch of scum. That's all. So then, what's the point of the tweet? And taking a more political interpretation, what's the point? The point is that as the hours go by, the famous peace plan, that stroke of genius from the intellectual pauper in Washington and his clique of mental dwarfs, that peace plan doesn't seem to be getting the right response. It's not getting the right response from many Arab countries. Others remain silent, terrified. It doesn't have the proper response from public opinion, among others, and first of all from the West. It doesn't have the proper response from some governments around the world. in South America, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia. And well, maybe the gentleman is seeing that if there's no peace plan, the business slips away. Because what's really worth doing here is taking a look at that peace plan, which calling it a peace plan is already a damn disgrace. A damn disgrace. I encourage everyone to read the 20 little points of the peace plan, just so they can find the critical ones. I had them marked somewhere here, because of course, as always, among all this stuff, among all the wordiness, they slip in what really matters. And we have to try to sift through all the fluff so it becomes clear what's really being aimed at. And that's the main issue.
Perdón. Un segundito, Juan Antonio. Antes de que presentes eso...
Sorry, just a second, Juan Antonio. Before you present that, here's the moment from last week, when Netanyahu, in a way, publicly expressed his support for Trump's plan.
Potentially one of the great days ever in civilization.
If Hamas rejects the agreement, which is always possible, they'll be the only ones left. Everyone else has accepted it, but I have the feeling we're going to get a positive response. But if not, as you know, Bibi, you'll have our support to do whatever you have to do.
What you would have to do.
I support your plan.
I support your plan to end the war in Gaza, which will achieve our military objectives. Gaza will have a peaceful civil administration.
That is run neither by Hamas nor by the Palestinians.
Juan Antonio, what are the points of this so-called plan, and to what extent do they align with Netanyahu's objectives?
Responden a los objetivos de Netanyahu.
Look, the first thing is when he says the others have accepted. What others? Who are the others? But come on, the ones who should be accepting are the Palestinian people. What are the others supposed to accept? Come on. What are you trying to sell us? A real estate project? So you can get rich? You, your wife, your son-in-law, your daughter, and the whole gang that follows you so you can get rich. Those are the others, right? Who are the others? Fine. What Trump did was take the peace plan, which wasn't really a peace plan, but rather a project that was presented at the time when the Abraham Accords were being negotiated, and Tony Blair was already involved in it, representing the British and their interests. When I talk about British interests, I mean the City of London, the real estate sector, and the bankers, the Saudis, the Qataris, the British, of course the Zionist entity, and the United States were all there. And that was a plan to make a business deal. So what they've done is take that plan, which I think was from around 2020, if I remember correctly, bring it back and adapt it to the current situation. This is what he calls the peace plan. And well, there are 20 points. As in any document of this kind, there are sections that present very general issues, which is normal, because that's what supposedly gives the document its polish, right? For example, point 1, right? I was referring to this decorative point, wasn't I? Gaza will be a terrorism-free and de-radicalized zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. Let's see, nice words. In reality, Gaza didn't pose any danger to its neighbors, as has been seen, as history has shown. What danger? To the occupier, right? To the Israeli occupier. Of course, for them it was the danger, wasn't it? All of this, when they say this, what they're really saying is that Gaza will be a zone where there will be no resistance to the Israeli occupation, so that it won't pose a threat to the Zionist entity. This is point 1. That is, they put it in other words, but this is what it really means. Or is it that maybe Gaza has been a threat to Jordan, to Egypt, to Iraq, to Iran, or to anyone? To whom has it been a threat? Don't take us for fools, right? Read things carefully because the devil is in the details. And basically what they're trying to do to you, the viewer, the listener, is deceive you, make a fool of you. Because they always think that since they're superior to everyone else must be idiots. I've said this many times, and I'll never get tired of saying it. Well then, Let's see. On to the next set of pretty words.
A ver, lo siguiente de bonitas palabras. Gaza será reurbanizada en beneficio de su población.
Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of its population, which has already suffered more than enough. Of course, it's as if a curse had fallen upon it, right? The 7 plagues of Egypt, right? As if a plague of locusts had struck there. It has suffered so much, an earthquake, I don't know. It hasn't suffered for no reason. They're dropping bombs on it. And they're dropping bombs on it. Who's dropping the bombs? I don't know. Let's say, come on, name them, Mr. Trump. Who's dropping the bombs? Who's selling those bombs? Who's putting them in the hands of the criminal so he can drop them, right? This isn't a natural disaster. Point 3 says, if both sides accept this proposal, the war will end immediately. Well, this is psychologically very well put. I mean, of course, if everyone agrees, the war ends, people stop dying, right? Anyone who only reads up to this point, what are they going to say? Well, we'll have to accept the peace plan as long as it ends the war and stops people from dying. But that's point 3. There are 17 more points, and then we get into a series of technical considerations of that agreement, such as that once all the hostages are released, Israel will release 250 prisoners sentenced to life imprisonment, in addition to 1,700 Gazans detained since October 7th, including all women and children. Let's see. Point 5, right? Because you read it. What do you mean, including all the women and children? But can you tell me that in Israeli prisons, the only democracy in the Middle East, the most honorable army in the world, the chosen people, and all those other pretentious lies of that religious fanaticism that thrives there, there are women and children? On what charges? Under what laws? It even says so, detained in the context of what's happening in Gaza. For every Israeli hostage whose remains have been recovered, they will release the remains of 15 deceased Gazans. Anyway, just technical matters, right? Point 6. Once all the hostages are returned, Hamas members commit to peaceful coexistence and to surrendering their weapons, and they will receive amnesty. In other words, the 6th point, once this is done, Hamas surrenders. What hasn't been achieved through weapons, what hasn't been achieved in 2 years of a military campaign by the world's greatest military power, the United States, since it is the one conducting the military campaign, providing logistics, intelligence, funding, and weapons. After 2 years, they now want Hamas to surrender, because if not, as the tweet says, they're going to kill them all. Hamas members who wish to leave Gaza will be given safe passage to the receiving countries. Which countries are those? We imagine Qatar, since it has always been behind Hamas, right? I suppose so, but that's just my own assumption. Point 7. After the acceptance of this agreement, all aid will be sent immediately to the Gaza Strip. At a minimum, the amount of aid will be in line with what was established in the agreement of January 19, 2025. Attention, the January 2025 agreement from January 19th on humanitarian aid to Gaza. That agreement has been violated because we're in October and it dates back to January 19th. And we're in October. What happened in January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, and September? They broke the agreement. Who broke it? Hamas? So, do the Palestinians not receive humanitarian aid? Or who is supposed to send it or allow it to be delivered? Who has failed to comply? Come on, Donald, let's see if you can count to 3 and tell me who has failed to comply. I know that, in the end, the problem is that you can't count to 3. Point 8. The entry and distribution of aid to the Gaza Strip will take place without interference from either side, through the United Nations and its agencies, the Red Crescent, as well as other international institutions, not associated in any way with either party. What associations or international institutions are those? Because all the management of this is going to be handed over to who knows whom.
Y entonces llegamos a los puntos donde...
And then we get to the points where, generally, not even the hack from the Western press, that miserable one who always sells out for a few euros to write whatever the masters want, is going to say it. But point 9 says, Gaza will be governed by a technocratic and apolitical Palestinian committee. What do you mean by a technocratic and apolitical Palestinian committee? Let's see, Gaza should be governed by the will of the Gazans, by the Palestinians who live there. But what kind of democracy is this? What do you mean a technocratic committee? Let's keep going, because of course this committee will only be able to manage, to handle, the daily administration of public services and municipalities. That is, to have water, electricity, and sewage, right? The committee will be made up of qualified Palestinians, we don't know who they are, and international experts. What do you mean, international experts? Under the supervision of a new international transitional body, the so-called Peace Board, which who's going to chair it? Donald Trump. Point 9, folks, don't miss this, really. It's going to be chaired by Donald Trump. And among them will be heads of state, to be announced soon, and former Prime Minister Tony Blair, the one who managed the little business deal that had been discussed at a meeting, as I said, in 2020, where Trump's son-in-law was present to make the big deal. This is the issue. They, this organization, will manage the funding for the redevelopment of Gaza. In other words, they're the ones who will handle the real estate speculation in Gaza's reconstruction. Oh, lovely, huh? The peace plan is laughable until the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program. What reform program? What's that? As described in various proposals, including President Trump's 2020 peace plan. It's right there in point 9. This is part of the Abraham Accords and the Franco-Saudi proposal, so that it can safely and effectively regain control of Gaza. Point 10. A Trump economic development plan will be created to rebuild and revitalize Gaza through the convening of a panel of experts. You can already imagine what that panel of experts will be like, right? The same ones who have contributed to the birth of some of the prosperous modern cities developed by well-intentioned international groups. Well, I'll tell you who those groups are. Vanguard, BlackRock, the Wall Street investment funds. These are the well-intentioned groups and banks, like Donald Trump when he built Trump Tower, with the best intention in the world, to make money.
Juan Antonio,
Juan Antonio, apparently behind this group of well-intentioned people, including Donald Trump, Tony Blair, and company, would be none other than Larry Ellison, who, according to the latest Forbes report, has very recently become the richest man in the world. He would not only sponsor Tony Blair's foundation in this endeavor, but the entire project, with the idea of creating a sort of digital and social experiment in Gaza. Here are his words regarding his vision of the future. What he wants to establish through his artificial intelligence companies, his digital control companies, and his systems of constant monitoring. These are some of the things he said some time ago.
Attention. Be on your best behavior, because we are constantly watching and recording everything that happens.
In our perfect society, in what we want, the police will behave in the best possible way, because we will be monitoring them all the time, with cameras running 24 hours a day.
Citizens will be on their best behavior.
Citizens will behave in the best way, because we are constantly recording and documenting everything that is happening.
When you come
Because we are going to be permanently monitoring and recording everything they do.
Because you're right at the forefront of this revolution, what it means.
Tony Blair asks the questions and Ellison answers. And here's Tony Blair's question. Among the tools for this project are digital, technological, and financial tools. But tell us a bit more about the plans of this fantastic company.
For what government should do in terms
of this fantastic project.
The first thing a country needs to do.
And that's where Ellison responds. How do we take advantage of these artificial intelligence models? The first thing states must do is unify all the information they've collected so that we can use artificial intelligence with all that data. Paradise, in the minds of these people, is basically a society of permanent surveillance, with all that information unified in the hands of a state that uses those AI tools, obviously, for repression. It's terrifying, Juan Antonio.
It's called a concentration camp. It's called a concentration camp. You can put lights and tablets and whatever you want. It's still called a concentration camp. And indeed, of course, this man, who is the CEO of Oracle, one of the big tech companies, who is Jewish, who funds Israel, and therefore, as I've already explained in another program, is complicit with the chief of genocide and should be sitting in the dock of the General Court of Justice to be hanged. According to Nuremberg jurisprudence, this man is one of the well-intentioned ones who are going to implement point 10 of the peace plan, along with his friend Tony Blair and the gang of rustlers who will accompany them. Well, look, let's spend a few more minutes on the following points because they're quite something, so we can understand what this peace plan really means. Point 11. A special economic zone will be established with preferential tariffs and access rates to be negotiated with the participating countries. Which countries? Egypt, Iran, Syria. Which countries? They're going to be rich countries, I'm telling you. They're going to be rich countries. The key players will be the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and some petromonarchies. Point 13. Hamas and other factions agree not to participate in the government of Gaza, neither directly nor indirectly, nor in any way. In other words, all of the rest of Palestine that isn't the Palestinian National Authority, when the time comes, or the imposed technocratic government, which is a de facto dictatorship, cannot take part in Gaza's political life.
No puede participar en la vida política de Gaza, que es como decir de la mitad de Palestina, ¿no?
Which is like saying half of Palestine, right? 14. The regional partners will ensure that Hamas and the factions fulfill their obligations. Who are the regional partners? Since we don't know, how are they going to guarantee that happens? I don't know. Are they going to form an international coalition to invade Gaza again? 15. The United States will work with Arab and international partners. This comes from the 2020 agreement to develop a temporary international stabilization force that will be deployed immediately in Gaza. In other words, a military occupation by American troops and their partners. We can already imagine who they are. I can tell you right now, there won't be any Chinese or Russian troops going.
No van a ir tropas chinas ni rusas, ya se lo digo yo, ni venezolanas. Van a ir de los de siempre.
Not Venezuelans. The usual ones will go, the colonialists. Point 16. Israel will neither occupy nor annex Gaza. Of course, there's no point in occupying it if you're already going to manage it with your friends and partners. As the Israel Defense Forces establish control and stability in the territory, that is, as they occupy it, the Israel Defense Forces will withdraw according to the rules, milestones, and timelines linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the Israel Defense Forces, the guarantors, and the United States. In other words, when will they leave? When the Zionist entity and the United States want to. I mean, really, I just can't believe it. And these forces will progressively cede the territory of Gaza they occupy until, according to an agreement reached with the Transitional Authority, they completely withdraw from Gaza, with the exception, and they will never withdraw from there, it's stated in the agreement, point 16, of a security perimeter that will be maintained until Gaza is properly protected against any resurgence of a terrorist threat. It's enough for someone to throw a single firecracker somewhere in Gaza or on the border with Israel for that area, that security perimeter, to remain occupied by Israeli troops. Point 17. In the event that Hamas rejects or replaces this proposal, including the intensification of the aid operation, those interposition or occupation forces that were to be deployed will remain in the terrorism-free zone handed over to the Israel Defense Forces. Point 18. An interreligious dialogue process is established among Jewish religious authorities, Shiites and Sunnis, or also with Christians. You'd think even a Buddhist monk might take part. I don't know. It's a typical point of delusion. Point 19. As the reurbanization of Gaza moves forward, which seems to be the only thing they care about, reurbanization appears 3 times in the peace plan, and as the Palestinian Authority's reform program is carried out, the conditions could finally emerge for a credible path towards self-determination and the creation of a Palestinian state, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. Point 19, looking ahead. After Hamas has surrendered, after the resistance has been eliminated, after the authority that, after tens and tens of thousands of Gazans have had to leave because they won't tolerate that place turning into a concentration camp. Afterward, in the future, when they've had to accept that there will be a security perimeter occupied by Israeli forces that will never leave, when they've had to endure an occupation force from the United States with who knows who else, and everyone goes there to do business, maybe in the future the conditions could exist for a credible path towards self-determination. This is the peace plan. Well, this is the mess that the White House puppet came up with to make a big family business deal. That brute in the White House and his gang of crooks. Of course, always well connected with the globalist tentacles that reach London, Paris, and the petromonarchies, which have a lot of money and need to invest it. And who's going to manage the gas fields off Gaza? I'll tell you who's going to manage them. Israel. Israel, to create its gas cluster that will send gas to Europe and keep getting richer, plundering, as it has until now, the states around it.
Juan Antonio, sin abandonar el tema de
Juan Antonio, without leaving the topic of Gaza, Israel, and the Middle East, I want us to briefly talk about this man behind the plan. The recently mentioned Larry Ellison, one of the richest men in the world. To all the demolishers, by the way, we ask you to help us spread this, because it's not being shown anywhere. These are the real oligarchs, the ones behind the visible puppets. Even Netanyahu himself is a puppet in the shadow of, for example, this figure, among many others. Peter Thiel, Jeff Bezos, and so on.
tantos otros como Peter Thiel, como Jeff Bezos, etc. Este Larry Ellison, el cofundador y presidente de...
This is Larry Ellison, the co-founder and chairman of Oracle, with a net worth of $400 billion. Since 2016, he has been one of the main financiers of the Republican Party and, naturally, took part in Donald Trump's 2020 fundraising campaign. He appears as the main investor in TikTok in the United States. Do you remember Trump's announcement? From that point on, a group of major investors would handle the administration or management of TikTok in the United States. They don't want TikTok in Chinese hands because it spreads messages contrary to the will of these gentlemen, among other things, images of the genocide in Gaza. Moreover, regarding Trump and the political ads, he is involved in the Stargate project, which was presented, if I remember correctly, in May of this year by Donald Trump himself in the United States at the White House. It's a massive artificial intelligence project with an investment of $500 billion from American taxpayers, taken from Americans' pockets, for a large-scale AI server generation project, together with Oracle, this gentleman. OpenAI. Sorry. In English, OpenAI, exactly, and SoftBank, one of the major Wall Street banks. Basically, Silicon Valley and Wall Street are dedicated to this, with 5 huge data centers for artificial intelligence.
Centros de datos para inteligencia artificial. Este señor va a capitanear.
This man is going to lead this project in Gaza. And moreover, not long ago, his son, David Ellison, began expanding this man's empire into the media, into the major outlets, through this company called Skydance Media, mentioned in this infographic, with the purchase of the very famous Paramount studio, gaining control of CBS, the CBS television network, or at least holding very large and growing stakes. And there's also the plan to buy Warner, with HBO and CNN. Let's also remember the media owned by Jeff Bezos and the media expansion of Peter Thiel. This is the real oligarchy of the world. These are the ruling classes with names and surnames. Dear Juan Antonio.
La verdadera oligarquía del mundo, estas las clases dominantes con nombre y apellido, querido Juan Antonio.
Absolutely. That's right. Moreover, they all have one thing in common. They all support the Zionist entity. Many of them are Jewish and have Israeli passports, like Ellison, Zuckerberg, Altman, and Bezos. They are Jewish and also have Israeli passports, and they have always supported the Zionist entity. They have always supported pro-Israel policies from Washington. Now what we are seeing is a law that Karl Marx himself predicted in his day. The development of capitalism leads to the accumulation of capital and the proletarianization of the masses. And I think we're witnessing an accumulation of capital like never before, in which the vectors of power are also interconnected. That is, the media, the tech companies, the financial sector, and, well, the military-industrial complex is still there because it's necessary to maintain the status quo, right? But this is the big picture, and these are names that show up everywhere. Missing because they're also very well known, since they love the cameras, are the old financial dinosaurs, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Barbers, anyway, all those people.
The Buffetts.
Of course, I mean the Buffetts, Warren Buffett, Larry Fink, but in the end it's a gang, an organized crime gang. It's a gang that, if you look closely, makes up a tiny, very small percentage of the population. I think that if we measured the court of Louis XIV or Louis XVI in Versailles, it would be fewer people than those represented by these guys, the families these guys represent. It's fewer people. It's a clear oligarchy that's putting the entire world at risk, not because they might lead us into nuclear war, which they could, but because they're leading us into a social model of a concentration camp. A concentration camp. Very technological, though. Clean. It's clean. There are no barbed wires, there are cameras, maybe there are no chains, but maybe you can't do anything. Because when you go with your multi-purpose card to buy something, they won't sell it to you. Or you go to check and they've seized the money in your account. And maybe even, well, by looking at your medical records, who knows? They might even have to recommend you be committed. I don't know. What's clear is that freedom cannot be in the hands of a technological apparatus built by a gang of rich people, all from the same tribe, determined that they are the ones who will run the future. And that we must not allow, no matter the cost, even if it means the sacrifice of many. We cannot allow that unless you, the one watching us, and your neighbors, your friends, and others, are willing for your children and grandchildren to end up living in a very clean, technological, resilient, sustainable, and gender-conscious concentration camp.
Resiliente, sostenible y de género.
Por aquí algunas palabras muy interesantes para...
Here we have some very interesting words for the next perspective on the same topic, the next dimension of the same topic. Juan Antonio, I'd like to hear your opinion on this afterward. This is Tucker Carlson, talking about the relationship between Israel and the United States. A very interesting debate has recently emerged within American conservatism. historically pro-Israel, but for some time now, much more critical, as in this case with Tucker Carlson. Pay attention. This one already has subtitles.
Trump, which I did. I campaigned for Trump. But even if it was Joe Biden, I'm an American. You can't treat. It's too humiliating.
I'm American. You can't treat me like this. It's too humiliating. I can't stand it. Bibi, not the nation of Israel, not the Israelis, and certainly not the Jews. Whatever that means. The leader, the secular prime minister of a country, is causing immense harm. Donald Trump.
He has this patronizing attitude. Donald Trump.
Bien, esta es la perspectiva de...
Well, this is the perspective of a tremendously popular communicator, aligned with the movement known as MAGA, Make America Great Again. But here, ultimately, and I completely agree with him on this, the following question arises. Does Israel determine US foreign policy, or does the United States determine Israel's foreign policy? Historically, Israel represented the US aircraft carrier in the Middle East. But according to many critics, in this case from the conservative side, they are presenting the current situation as a reversal, Israel dominating US foreign policy against the interests of the United States. This, from what we could call Trumpian conservatism in the United States. But now, I want to present, before hearing your perspective, Juan Antonio, the same issue from the American left, with Jeffrey Sachs. Pay attention to this.
War with Iran, and he dragged the United States.
Israel is seeking an endless war, a prolonged war with Iran, and it's dragging the United States into it. It's a real shame.
Just recently, and it's extremely dangerous.
He's
dragging Israel, or rather Netanyahu, is dragging the United States into participating in this war, the war with Iran. And this is tremendously dangerous for the United States and for the world. And of course, Netanyahu wants another attack on Iran. It's been part of his plan from the beginning for the United States to take part in endless wars in the Middle East.
It's not in America's interest.
It's not in America's interest. It's not in America's interest to be isolated in the world, along with a red state that's also isolated.
Murderous rogue state, which is.
And it's not in the interest of the United States to end up completely isolated, allied with a pariah and murderous state like Israel. The words of Jeffrey Sachs, by the way, Jeffrey Sachs, also Jewish. A little more. It's sad to say what the Israeli government has been.
It is the most lawless state in the whole world right now. It's committing.
Well, the Israeli state has become the state most opposed to or most in conflict with international law in the world, and it is committing countless war crimes. This is now a critical perspective from the opposite ideological pole. From the right and from the left, the same criticism. What's your perspective on this, Juan Antonio?
Pues que tienen razón, pero es que les falta un paso.
Well, they're right, but they're missing a step. That is, to be consistent, one would have to ask, how is it possible that the United States follows so closely what the Prime Minister of Israel decides? How is that possible? Moreover, I include all the countries of the European Union. How is that possible? Well, there's only one explanation. Because regardless of whether the Republican Party or the Democratic Party is in power, Trump or Biden, right or left, above all that there is a ruling class, an oligarchic ruling class, which we've been talking about before, that holds the real power. Therefore, it's a false question when we ask, does Israel dominate U.S. foreign policy?
¿Israel domina la política exterior norteamericana? ¿Estados Unidos quien domina la política israelí?
Is the United States the one that dominates Israeli politics in the Middle East? No. They're the same thing. They're absolutely intertwined. You can't separate them, because the ruling elite that sets the policies of the Zionist entity is the same ruling elite that's in the United States, in London, in Brussels, and in some other Pacific capital. It's the same. And logically, all these people who apparently govern are going to follow the directives of the ruling class, the one that put them there, and ultimately the one they like to belong to. that ruling class. There is no democracy in the West. We're clear about that. There is no democracy. They are oligarchic systems. One should even question whether democracy within the capitalist model is really possible.
Dentro del modelo capitalista es posible. Porque en el momento en que el proceso, la lógica,
because at the moment when the process, the internal logic of the capitalist system leads to an accumulation of wealth, to the concentration of capital, and to the proletarianization of the masses, that concentration of capital will have the power to turn into an oligarchy and rule over every aspect of social life. So then, how can there be democracy? How could you and I, if tomorrow we ran for office, I don't know, you yesterday in Germany or I here in Spain, possibly have the means to carry out our work against candidates backed by the oligarchy? Because they really are its lackeys, the oligarchy's guerrillas, as Evita used to say. And they will also have at their service the media, bank financing, the judicial power, and police protection.
El poder judicial, la protección policial. Van a tener todo. Y tú no tienes nada.
They're going to have everything, and you have nothing. You have nothing. Nothing. And then in that democratic equality, they think you'll be able to win an election. Look, when a party or a candidate who wasn't expected suddenly has a chance to win, it's simply because the situation is really bad. Because it's really bad. For example, when Iliescu won the elections in Romania, it was because the social situation was deplorable. And that's why they start taking measures to ultimately eliminate even that aspect of democracy in which someone can emerge and take power at a given moment. Trump he's a parachutist. He doesn't belong to the great family of that oligarchy. He likes being part of that oligarchy. He'd like to be, but he didn't belong. That's why he's always had a lot of trouble doing some of the things he wanted to do, and that's why he won't be able to do them. He spouts his nonsense, his rudeness, his foolishness. That's just how he is. Besides, he's ignorant, and he'd love to win the Nobel Peace Prize, an Oscar, to win Eurovision. Those are the kinds of things Trump would like, because that's the character. But let's not be mistaken. That character is now surrounded, well, not by choice, they've surrounded him, by this oligarchic class. Remember, and it was on this show where we showed it, the photo of the dinner in London during Trump's visit with King Charles III. That's the photo of the oligarchy. They're all sitting there. Daniel Izzo was there. They were all there, 10 times over. I don't know how Elon Musk wasn't there. I don't know if it's because he doesn't like that kind of fanfare or what. Or because he's angry with someone. But there they all were, all of them, with names and surnames. The thing is, really, we're talking about people who have more money in their bank accounts than the budgets of many states. People who can shape circumstances however they want. And I repeat, it's either them or us, them or us. In the end, that dialectic between states emerges, and within states, it's said that there are classes. This is the ultimate expression of the capitalist class at its highest level. You will own nothing and be happy, but you will own nothing because they will keep everything for themselves. That's how it is. That's why you will own nothing. You'll be happy because they'll give you drugs, they'll give you psychotropics, whether in the form of streaming platforms, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, whatever. Apparently happy.
Esta, por cierto, la principal droga de nuestro tiempo. Y a propósito...
This is, by the way, the main drug of our time. And speaking of this, here we go, by the way. We keep connecting topics without leaving the core of it all. Here's an intervention by Netanyahu at a meeting with the most important influencers in the United States. Netanyahu, who visited the US just recently, called together the country's top influencers, all of them naturally sponsored by Israel, to present the guidelines for their work. We're showing it here, right now.
Lo presentamos aquí, ahora mismo, y por cierto, una vez más, demoledores y demoledoras.
And by the way, once again, demolishers, here we are, at this moment, leading a battle against the owners of the world, against the ruling classes of the world, the real villains of the story. It's your responsibility to help us spread this. We're already putting our necks on the line here. So please, please help us with a thumbs up, with a subscription, with comments. Every interaction with this platform helps spread our videos, our analyses. That, please, is everyone's task. And with that said, here's Netanyahu in front of the influencers of the United States. Attention.
Netanyahu frente a los influencers de Estados Unidos. Atención.
And secondly, we're going to have to use the tools of battle.
And second, we're going to have to use the tools of battle. And the most important ones are social media. And the most important acquisition happening right now is TikTok. TikTok. Number one. And the other one, the most important, X. Very good. You know, we have to talk to Elon. He's not an enemy.
And, so we have to talk to Elon. He's not an enemy. He's a friend. We should talk to him. Now, if we can get
the search for ownership or control of TikTok and X, said by Netanyahu himself.
De boca de Netanyahu, Juan
No,
Antonio.
hay una cosa buena que tiene Netanyahu. Eso hay que reconocerlo.
There's one good thing about Netanyahu, and we have to acknowledge it. He doesn't hide. He's shameless. He just says what he thinks. No, we're going to take control of this. We have to talk to Elon because he's our friend, not an enemy. Why? Because that's what needs to be used, social media, as a tool for battle. I mean, he's telling us. He's literally saying it. That's why, when I say either them or us, I imagine those watching us understand perfectly what that them or us means.
Entienden perfectamente ese ellos o nosotros.
Because we can already see what they do. And with that control, using all the mechanisms of cognitive warfare, they will occupy, just as an army occupies territory, they will occupy your minds, our minds. So we must fight against the occupation, not only the physical occupation of territory as the Palestinians do for their homeland, we must also fight against the occupation of this territory. And this is a daily bombardment on social media, in the news, on television. If we're not aware of that, we're lost, right?
Si no somos conscientes de eso, estamos perdidos,
Último aspecto de...
Last point, Israel, Netanyahu, the United States, the Middle East. Here the video released yesterday by Greta Thunberg, one of the participants in the global Sumud flotilla. All of them already detained. Attention.
Global Sumud, todos ellos ya detenidos. Atención.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I'm a citizen of Sweden. If you are watching this...
This is Greta's video, and here's a video shared by this one.
Hundido por este impresentable Ben-Gvir.
Disgraceful in Gebir. Pay attention to this. In Israel, with all the detainees, humiliating them, saying they are terrorists. There, they're touring one of the ships.
De los barcos en búsqueda de armas como prueba de que estos tipos...
In search of weapons as proof that these people are terrorists. And there they went. Humanitarian aid, food, supplies. Well, nothing was found, obviously, other than food. It was the Minister of the Interior, if I remember correctly, of Israel, and he belonged to a supremacist, overtly racist faction within Israel.
Supremacista dentro de Israel.
Un completo enfermo mental. Hay que darle más vueltas.
A complete lunatic. No need to overthink it. A complete lunatic, a sociopath. Look, given the cause in question, there would be reasons to identify certain things about the flotilla, about some of its representatives. It's also said that Greta Thunberg has her limitations. Let's put it that way. I don't want to go after them, because this isn't the time. Yes, I'll just dare to say one thing, and it's based on what Greta Thunberg said. Pressure our governments. No, let's be clear. The people in the flotilla knew perfectly well they knew. Let's not be naive. We all knew that Israel doesn't comply with international law. It couldn't care less about international law. And when we say Israel, we mean the United States and its allies. Let's never forget the governments of the European Union, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, and the states, well, all of North America, the United States of America and Canada. Their hands are stained with the blood of the genocide in Gaza. Not just Netanyahu or that lunatic who came out calling the detainees terrorists. Because otherwise, nothing makes sense. If we get the impression that Netanyahu is Dr. No from Spectre, that he has immeasurable power, no. Let's not be naive, let's not be foolish, let's not believe this stupid narrative. No.
Creamos el relato estúpido este. No. Entonces la flotilla sabía que Israel no iba a cumplir.
So the flotilla knew that Israel was not going to comply with international law, and that in international waters, they were going to be assaulted and detained. They knew it perfectly well. In fact, we have watched with shame and embarrassment as the Spanish government sent a maritime action ship, a warship, Italy sent another warship, Greece sent another warship, all NATO countries. Most of those on the flotilla are citizens of NATO countries. And they made you run away like cowards. What are they? Following the directives of their respective governments. There wasn't a single captain in command of his ship who said, no, I'm going to defend these people who are being assaulted by those guys. And it's international waters. There was no captain, only miserable money grabbers. You know, remember the peseta was Spain's currency, right? Sold out for a few coins commanding their ships. A disgrace to the uniform, a disgrace to the honor of their respective navies, an absolute disgrace to that filthy military alliance called NATO. Nothing. They ran away. And the people in the flotilla knew this was going to happen. Isn't it, or wouldn't it be, much more important to launch the flotilla against the respective Western governments of NATO and the United States, who are equally responsible on the same level as Netanyahu? Wouldn't it perhaps have been more effective to call those general strikes? Either the policy toward the Zionist state changes, or this is over. It's over, and this government will fall.
Se acaba, y este gobierno se cae.
So we organized the flotilla thing, which I'm not criticizing, I'm saying it's fine. I mean, it seems to me, and I also know there were many people who went with the best intentions in the world, including doctors and even lawyers, to defend detained Palestinians. So I'm not criticizing it. I just think there's no strategic perspective on what the conflict really is. This isn't simply a humanitarian issue, as if there were a country run by a terrible government attacking a defenseless population in Gaza. If the conflict is understood in those terms, there's no other way to see it, because the conflict itself isn't framed in those terms.
Porque el conflicto no está planteado en esos parámetros. El conflicto es un conflicto geopolítico.
The conflict is a geopolitical one in which the same so-called democracies, from which most of the Freedom Flotilla activists come, are involved. And not just involved, but active participants. Do we understand where the conceptual flaw lies when it comes to figuring out how to address the conflict? That's the issue. If you manage to twist the arm of the French, British, German, Spanish, or Italian government, then you've really twisted their arm. The resources of those states are what will go to help Gaza, not 30 small boats that you know won't make it because they won't let you get there. And they send Navy ships to put on a show of defense, only to leave you stranded. We notice there's a mistake in the campaign's approach. If we speak in military terms, there's a strategic error there. You can't frame the conflict that way. Maybe it works for publicity, so some people get on the news and interviewed, or some write a book someday and Greta makes her video and all that. But that's not how you win a battle. And I think, as I said, this isn't a criticism of them, because they're the ones who got on the boats and went over there. And that carries risk. It's not a criticism, but it's clear that whoever thinks about, directs, or plans this kind of action clearly has a very mistaken idea of how to wage a battle in this conflict. And the evidence speaks for itself.
Juan
Antonio, let's leave the Middle East aside for a moment and focus on Russia. where the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, took part in the Valdai Forum. Actually, the Valdai Discussion Club, if I remember correctly, is the real name of this high-level conference, in which Russian leaders deliberate on politics, the economy, and defense. Usually, Putin takes part with very, very significant speeches. Here are some of the things Putin said, this one with subtitles, about the war in Ukraine in this case.
La guerra en Ucrania en este caso.
All right, this is about the Russian drones in the area.
Los drones rusos en la sopa. ¿Qué cosas más dichas por ahí?
What else did Putin say over there in Valdai? Many, many, many things. Just a second of patience. It went on for more than 4 hours. So yeah. All right. This part here is in response to Trump's characterization of paper tigers. Here Putin replies jokingly, well, like many of his answers, if we're fighting against the entire NATO bloc and we're making very strong and confident advances, and that means we're a paper tiger, then what is NATO itself? And then the laughter. What do they represent?
Bueno, que Dios los acompañe, la gente ahí riendo.
Well, may God be with them, people there laughing. The most important thing is that we have confidence in ourselves. And here's a joking question from the interviewer. Do you know those little paper tigers that children have? When you meet Trump, why don't you give him one as a gift? And Putin replies, well, I have a good relationship with Trump. We know each other. We deal with these things, very calmly, very relaxed. I don't know in what context he said that about the paper tiger, but most likely it was said with irony. Well, de-escalating with Trump, but the message is clear. If we are the paper tiger that's winning, then you. The irony is what Putin is using.
La ironía es la que está utilizando Putin. Bueno, hay que decir, a ver, esto es la conferencia.
Well, it must be said, let's see, the Valdai conference is held every year. He was there, gave a speech, and then answered questions for about 4 hours. You can imagine, I have somewhere a collection of quotes of all the things one can say in 4 hours. They are, well, what you mentioned, which is part of what was discussed, the paper tigers thing. Now, Trump said that in a tweet, like almost everything he says in a tweet. Trump doesn't know that the phrase comes from President Mao Zedong. He can't know it because it's impossible. It goes against his nature to know that those are Mao Zedong's words. If I remember correctly from 1956, from a statement Mao Zedong made in 1956 to define imperialism, imperialists are paper tigers. And well, indeed, one must look at the events, right? That is to say, the paper tiger seems to have liberated more than 5,000 square kilometers of territory just this year, including the entire Kursk area. I'm not going to refer here to the casualties, the destruction of the enemy, and all that. Not against the 30 NATO countries, but against the 50 from Rammstein, the ones who finance, send weapons, and support the Kiev regime. 50 countries that meet in Rammstein, Germany. Every time they meet, everyone who goes knows it's going to cost them money. And these blocs face Russia. And it's the paper tiger, of course. The others just gather the mouse's tail, which is good for nothing, because given what we've seen, obviously NATO knows that Russia is not going to launch any attack, no reverse Operation Barbarossa to invade all of Europe.
Ninguna operación Barbarroja a la inversa para invadir toda Europa. Lo sabe por una cuestión de sentido común.
He knows it out of common sense. When you look at the tables of military resources needed for a campaign of that kind, right? And you realize that the enemy has a defense budget 20 times larger than yours, 3 times your population, and 4 times your GDP. So how are you going to do that? They know that perfectly well. So, they're being dishonest. Indeed, they're being dishonest. Putin, who in the relaxed atmosphere of the Valdai Club even shows a sense of humor, irony, and all that, says it in those terms. If we want to be a bit more precise, we have to say they're thieves. Plain and simple. A gang of thieves whose goal is to squeeze the pockets of Europeans to take everything they can from them. To feed whom? the oligarchy we were talking about earlier. In this case, more from the military-industrial complex, but of course with the financial backing of the financiers, among whom are the same ones we discussed before. And the circle closes, and that's what they are, dishonest. And the proof is what we've been seeing these past few days. I had 4 or 5 little things to comment on here. For example, the issue of the drones. We started with the matter of the 19 drones over Poland, which was a complete joke. We're not going to refer to that anymore. Ezequiel Bistoletti's programs are recorded. We can look at them later. Instead, let's talk about the immense number of drones that every day and without interruption fly over Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Germany, France, Belgium. Just in Germany, last night there were 15 drones over the airport. I don't know if it was Berlin's or Stuttgart's, maybe Munich's. I remember the news too. 15 drones. If you start counting all this from the past few days, what are we talking about? Around 70 or 80 drones that have entered NATO airspace without them being able to shoot down a single one. Not one. To say, here it is, look, the drone, look, there's President Putin's face, look, there it is, they're Russian. Not one. They can't shoot down even a single one. Moreover, I wonder, 50, 60, 70 drones flying over northern Germany, southern Germany, Belgium, Sweden, northern Norway. Are there any of those planes that refuel them in the air? Because at some point they'll run out of fuel. And when the fuel runs out, the drone falls. It just falls. It runs out of batteries, so to speak, and boom, down it goes. They haven't been able to recover a single one, not a single one of these drones. Now, at this point, and without further evidence, which would have to be analyzed because these people are capable of inventing even the wheel, it's clear that this whole thing is staged. It's a lie. It's a lie. Maybe they take advantage of situations like that. Chinese couple who were playing with a drone. I think a German couple too, in Norway, was arrested because they were playing with a drone. And things like that might happen. Of course. But that's the fine print of the fine print. That's not what's going to make the headlines. What makes the headlines is the threat of Russian drones, a form of hybrid warfare that frightens all of Europe, right? Moreover, no one really knows where they come from. It seems the radars don't detect anything. No one knows where they go afterward either. They haven't attacked any targets or anything. I don't know, maybe they're taking pictures. I mean, let's see. I mean, what have they found out? Do those drones emit signals? Yes, anything. I mean, what have they found out? What has all of NATO found out about this issue? Nothing. That there is a Russian threat, and therefore a drone wall must be built that will cost an unimaginable amount. I think that's why Merz, the German, has been one of those who raised his voice and said no, that there's no money for that, a drone wall. Because they always try to fix everything by spending money. Spending money, of course, from the citizens, not their own, not theirs. So they spend the citizens' money, so it ends up in the same old pockets. Finally, we've had to listen to how, first the German government, and now also the British government, claim that there are Russian satellites chasing German and British satellites through space. Have they presented any kind of evidence? I don't know. Deep radar data or signals picked up by their own satellites or something? Something, anything. No. They say their satellites are being chased by Russian satellites, but they can't show us. Why? Some proof, something we can analyze. Let's see if they're lying to us again. Nothing. And when there's nothing, you can't analyze anything. And since you can't analyze anything, you can't uncover the lie. And when someone doesn't want something to be uncovered, it's because it's a lie. Finally, for example, the issue that since they no longer have what it takes between their legs, since they no longer have that to stop the Russian oil tankers in the Baltic. Now little Napoleon Macron, showing off his guts and testosterone, went and seized a Russian oil tanker.
Asaltó un petrolero ruso. Hasta que Rusia avisó diciendo que eso era un acto de piratería.
Until Russia warned that it was an act of piracy and that it would respond. And then just a few hours later, the captain and crew took their tanker and quietly headed toward India, which is straight ahead. Yet another example of the courage of little Napoleon, and in general, of all of NATO. And he's very worried because, of course, now the Russian ships, those from the Baltic Fleet, are starting to move around out there. And of course, that's a problem. They start moving around out there, and it's a problem because, according to the Danish authorities, there are GPS interferences. Ultimately, also because they're afraid there might be a clash.
En definitiva también porque tienen miedo de que haya un encontronazo. Y a lo mejor no salen bien del encontronazo. Una Dinamarca que monta...
And maybe they won't come out of the clash well. A Denmark that organizes a summit, almost another farce that has served no purpose, just so they can keep talking about the same thing. It feels like the threat is becoming more imminent every day. And a Denmark that is going to lose Greenland. And it deserves it. It deserves it. They're going to lose it because it's simply serving interests that are not those of the Danes, just like the rest of the countries in the European Union. No more, no less.
These are the images of the boarding of the tanker Boracay by the French armed forces. A consensual boarding. In fact, the ladder is placed there by the ship's own crew.
So they would show them their driver's license.
Everything was in order there. By the way, Juan Antonio, regarding the European Council meeting in Copenhagen, beyond the fact that they couldn't reach the desired agreement, neither Ursula von der Leyen with a very specific proposal for a drone wall, such nonsense, nor Zelensky, who once again took part, managed to secure an agreement on Ukraine's entry into the European Union, or on sending more money, more weapons, and so on. Even so, apparently, the tone of the proposals seemed to rise a notch compared to before. Hence this post from Viktor Orbán, who of course took part. Copenhagen, second day. The situation is serious. There are clearly warlike proposals on the table. They want to transfer European Union funds to Ukraine. They're trying to speed up Ukraine's accession through all kinds of legal maneuvers. Do they want to finance the shipment of weapons? All these proposals clearly show that the Brussels crowd wants to go to war. I will stand firm on the Hungarian position, but this summit also shows that the coming months will focus on the threat of war. We will need the support of our entire political community and of all Hungarians who long for peace. Lately, well, in the past few days, Juan Antonio, caught up in this madness of GPS signal disruptions, Russian drones everywhere, the alleged violation of Estonian airspace, Europeans are creating the impression that they want greater involvement and entry into a direct war. Even Tusk's statements the other day about, "This is our war." Until recently, they rejected that idea. This is Ukraine's war. We're simply helping them in the name of international law and the sovereignty of nations. Are the drums of war already beginning to sound openly, Juan Antonio? Or am I misinterpreting things?
No, ellos sirven a quien sirven. Y es a quien sirven, pues a decir...
No. They serve whoever they serve. And it's the one they serve who decides that an artificial demand must be created through the military-industrial complex, because the economic situation is very bad, and besides, the population, at a certain point, might rebel. And those who decide give the orders, and this gang of idiots simply obeys. Where yesterday they said, "This is not our war," today they say, "This is our war," and they're perfectly calm about it. I mean, it doesn't matter, that thing about the Marxist, right? I mean, Groucho, I have principles, and if you don't like them, I have others. That's the game they play. but of course always in a more or less controlled way. If we think about it, there's a lot of talk, but few real tangible actions. Like I said before, are they capable of taking down a drone? One of the Baltics said you'd have to be very sick. He said Europe will only react when it has an event like September 11. Considering how suspicious that event already was, and how controversial it has always been, bringing up September 11 is really either sinister or irresponsible.
O siniestro o irresponsable. Pero así son estos tipos. Así son estos tipos. Claro.
But that's how these guys are. That's how these guys are. They need to feed that Russian threat, but without going so far as to actually have a real war, a truly real one, because the city could end up getting hit by a missile. So it's a very tricky, very dangerous balancing act. Very dangerous, because what they're after is a low-intensity conflict, a war that doesn't go beyond the conventional, where there won't be major military operations or anything like that. But yes, plenty of shelling, plenty of drones, plenty of stuff, lots of troops, and that it stays right at the threshold of what could become truly dangerous. And that way they can fully justify taking political, economic, social control and repressive measures.
De control social, de represión,
a greater solidification of political regimes, a greater distortion of this shabby democracy we're suffering, elimination of all dissent, so that in the end, indeed, everyone inside the concentration camp goes to work, because they have to pay the oligarchy, the big ones, those at the palace table in London. That's what they want, and that's why they're indeed heading toward conflict, always thinking they'll be able to control it. But of course, maybe there comes a moment when even Putin says, this is as far as we go, and maybe the conflict gets out of hand, and then the self-fulfilling prophecy will come true. See how Russia was a threat. Very dangerous. We've been warning about it. This is very dangerous, and the people must stay alert.
Y los pueblos tienen que estar alerta.
Querido Juan Antonio, vamos a redondear la conversación aquí porque...
Dear Juan Antonio, let's wrap up the conversation here, because in 10 minutes Fernando Morogon's show begins on our sister channel, MP Geopolitics, with a simulcast here. Don't miss it. Many thanks as always to all our supporters. Please remember to give us a like, a thumbs up, subscribe, and consider a membership. You can also support us through PayPal, of course. And with that said, your closing remarks, whatever you'd like, Juan Antonio.
Well, those were almost the exact same words. We're living in a very dangerous moment. There are situations in history, and we've seen them, where, for various reasons, such as this one in which a hegemony is confronted by emerging powers, global uncertainty increases dramatically. The problem with rising uncertainty is that it's usually accompanied by an acceleration of events. In any case, faced with so much uncertainty, decisions often end up being wrong, because you barely have time, or you're not really sure which way to go.
No tienes claro por dónde hay que tirar. Entonces se produce una aceleración. Y así podemos ver cómo
Then an acceleration occurs, and thus we can see how, in a relatively short period of time, events speed up, things move faster. We see many changes happening very quickly. Putin also pointed this out earlier at the Valdai conference, how the world is changing a lot and very fast. Of course, high uncertainty and accelerated changes indicate high danger, a lot of danger. And since we already see how these people operate, what their intentions are, how little respect they have for the citizens, how little respect they have for their own countries, because really they work for those they work for, as we've said before. Well, my friend, they could drag us into a very dangerous situation, a very dangerous one. And as I said before, the people should stay alert, because in the end, they won't be the ones going to war. You will.
Juan Antonio, un placer como siempre.
Well, Antonio, a pleasure as always. Your show is tomorrow, right? On DMP and Geopolitics. And to all the demolishers, remember that we've also launched our English channel, Demolishing Myths in Politics, so you can help us spread the word among your English-speaking friends. And yes, Those who aren't comfortable with Spanish can join us through that English channel with AI-generated dubbing. Demolishers, see you soon. Bye-bye.
Come on, God, greetings.
Yeah.